At 6:58 a.m. on October 25, 1944, gunner's mate Second Class Robert Hardin stood inside Mount 51 aboard the USS Samuel B. Roberts, watching through his sight as the largest battleship ever built trained its guns directly at him. The Yamato was 7 miles away, close enough that Hardin could see the massive turrets rotating, close enough to count the gun barrels, close enough to know that when those 18-inch guns fired, his destroyer Escort, a ship designed to hunt submarines, not fight battleships, would be vaporized. His ship displaced 1,350 tons. The Yamato displaced 72,000 tons. His largest gun was 5 inches. Yamato's main battery was 18 inches. The math was simple and terrifying. The radio in Mount 51 crackled. Commander Copeland's voice came through, calm and matter-of-fact. "All ahead flank. We're going in." Hardin looked at his gun captain, Chief Gunner's mate James McCaskill. McCaskill was 31, from Biloxi, had 2 kids he talked about every night. McCaskill just nodded once and said, "Load for surface action." They were charging. A destroyer Escort was charging the Yamato. Hardin didn't know that in the next 2 hours, his ship would take 3 direct hits from battleship guns, fire 608 5-inch shells, launch a torpedo spread at point-blank range, and somehow survive when 4 other ships wouldn't. He didn't know his actions would help save 30,000 American troops on the beaches at Leyte Gulf. All he knew was that they were about to die. Robert Hardin was 24 years old, a farm kid from outside Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Before the war, he'd driven tractors and fixed farm equipment. His hands knew tools and machinery. When he enlisted in January 1943, the Navy looked at those hands and made him a gunner's mate. He'd been aboard the Samuel B. Roberts for 7 months. The ship was a destroyer Escort. Sailors called them DEs, or tin cans, because their hulls were thin enough that you could supposedly punch through them. The Roberts had been commissioned in April 1944. Brand new ship. Green crew DEs were designed for one job: hunt submarines. They were small, fast, and cheap to build. Their 5-inch guns were meant for surfacing U-boats, not enemy warships. They carried depth charges and torpedoes for anti-submarine work. Nobody expected them to fight surface battles. The Roberts had spent 6 months doing exactly what she was built for: escort duty, anti-submarine patrols, protecting convoys. Boring work, safe work. Hardin had never fired his gun at an enemy ship, never even seen an enemy ship except in recognition manuals. The crew was 224 men. Most were 18 to 25 years old. Most had never been to sea before the Navy. The wardroom had 15 officers. Commander Robert W. Copeland, the captain, was 36, ancient by destroyer Escort standards. The ship had one advantage: her crew trained obsessively. Copeland ran gunnery drills until the men could load and fire in their sleep, damage control drills until every man knew every valve, every hatch, every pump. The Roberts could make 24 knots, fast for a DE. Her turning radius was tight. She was nimble, but nimble didn't matter against battleships. The Roberts was part of Taffy 3, a task unit of 6 escort carriers, 3 destroyers, and 4 destroyer escorts. The escort carriers were baby flat tops, small carriers that launched planes for ground support and anti-submarine patrol. Slow ships, vulnerable ships. Taffy 3's job was simple: provide air support for the landings at Leyte Gulf. Stay off the coast, launch planes, recover planes, stay safe behind the massive 7th Fleet battle line 50 miles south. On October 24th, the 7th Fleet moved south to intercept a Japanese force coming through Surigao Strait. That left Taffy 3 alone off Samar Island with no heavy ships nearby. Nobody worried. The Japanese had retreated. Their navy was broken. Intel said the area was clear. Intel was wrong. At 6:45 a.m. on October 25th, Hardin was eating breakfast in the crew's mess, powdered eggs and coffee. The ship was at general quarters, battle stations, because dawn was when submarines attacked. Routine precaution. The call came at 6:47 a.m. Lookouts on the escort carrier. Fanshawe Bay had spotted something. Ships on the horizon. Lots of ships. At first, everyone thought they were American. Had to be American. No Japanese ships were supposed to be within 200 miles. Then the Japanese opened fire. The shells were enormous. They threw up water columns 200 feet high, taller than the Escort T-carrier's masts. You could see them coming, these massive splashes marching across the ocean toward Taffy 3. Someone on the bridge identified them. Pagoda masts, Japanese battleships. The radio erupted. Admiral Clifton Sprague, commanding Taffy 3, transmitted in the clear. Enemy surface force attacking. Request immediate assistance. Hardin ran to his battle station. Mount 51, forward 5-inch gun. Through the open hatch, he could see the horizon. There were ships there, big ships, 4 battleships, 8 cruisers, 11 destroyers. The Japanese center force, Admiral Kurita's striking force, built around the Yamato, and her sister ship Musashi. They'd come through San Bernardino Strait during the night. Nobody had been guarding the strait. The whole American fleet was 50 miles south. Taffy 3 was alone. 6 baby flat tops, 3 destroyers, 4 destroyer escorts. Against the most powerful surface force Japan had ever sent to sea. The math was impossible. The 6 escort carriers displaced 10,000 tons each. The Yamato alone displaced 72,000 tons. Combined, the Japanese force had more firepower than all of Taffy 3 multiplied by 10. Sprague ordered the carriers to run east, making smoke, launching every plane they had. The carriers could make 18 knots, barely faster than a jogging pace. The Japanese battleships could make 27 knots. It would take the Japanese maybe 90 minutes to catch them. Then they'd slaughter the carriers one by one. And after the carriers were gone, they'd steam into Leyte Gulf and destroy the American invasion force on the beaches. 30,000 troops with no air cover, no naval support, no escape. Unless someone stopped them. Hardin watched through his gun sight as the Japanese ships grew larger. He could see them clearly now, the distinctive pagoda-style superstructures, the massive gun turrets, the bow waves from their speed. The lead battleship was Yamato. Even from 7 miles away, she was monstrous. Yamato's main guns were 18.1 inches in diameter. Each shell weighed 200 pounds, more than a car. When those guns fired, the blast wave could kill a man standing on deck 100 feet away. The shells could punch through 16 inches of steel armor at 25 miles. They could hit a target the size of a carry's car at 30 miles. The Samuel B. Roberts hull was 5/8 of an inch thick. Yamato carried 9 18-inch guns in 3 turrets. Her secondary battery had 12 6-inch guns. Her anti-aircraft battery had 12 5-inch guns, the same size as the Roberts' main battery. The Roberts' biggest gun was Yamato's anti-aircraft weapon. Behind Yamato came Nagato, Kongo, and Haruna, all battleships, all carrying 14-inch or 16-inch main guns. The cruisers had 8-inch guns. Even the Japanese destroyers outgunned the American destroyer escorts. The Roberts' 5-inch guns had a maximum range of 9 miles, but hitting anything beyond 7 miles was luck. The shells weighed 55 pounds. Against Yamato's armor, they'd bounce off like thrown rocks. The Japanese had 428 large-caliber guns. Taffy 3 had 27 5-inch guns. At 6:50 a.m., the Japanese opened fire on the carriers. Hardin watched the muzzle flashes, brilliant yellow blooms on the horizon. 20 seconds later, the shells arrived. Massive geysers erupted around USS White Plains. colored red and yellow and green from dye markers the Japanese used to spot their fall of shot. Each battleship used different colored dye so spotters could tell their shells apart. Red for Yamato, yellow for Nagato, green for Congo. The ocean around Taffy 3 turned into a rainbow of death. One salvo from Yamato would kill everyone aboard the Roberts. Just one hit. The 200-pound shell would pass through both sides of the ship and explode underwater, breaking her back. And there was nothing the Roberts could do about it. Her guns couldn't hurt Yamato. Her torpedoes had a 2-mile range. She'd be destroyed long before getting that close. Her armor couldn't stop anything larger than a rifle bullet. The only logical order was to make smoke and run. At 6:55 a.m., Admiral Sprague ordered the destroyers to attack. Not the destroyer escorts, just the 3 destroyers, Johnston, Hoel, and Heermann. Bigger ships, better armed. USS Johnston went first. Commander Ernest E. Evans, her captain, was half Cherokee, all warrior. At 6:56 a.m., Johnston turned toward the Japanese and accelerated to flank speed, making smoke, charging alone toward 4 battleships. Hardin watched through binoculars. Johnston was kan wat kid, 3 miles north of the Roberts, close enough to see clearly. She was racing straight at Yamato, weaving through shell splashes, disappearing into her own smoke, then reappearing, guns firing as fast as the crews could load. It was suicide. Everyone knew it was suicide, but Johnston went anyway. At 6:59 a.m., Johnston reached torpedo range. She fired a full spread, 10 torpedoes. Then she turned hard, trying to escape. The Japanese concentrated fire. Every ship in range fired at Johnston. Yamato, Nagato, Congo, 6 cruisers, 20 battleship and cruiser guns, all firing at one destroyer. At 7:01 a.m., Johnston took her first hit. A 14-inch shell from Congo, then another, then 3 at once. The bridge exploded. The aft engine room flooded. One hit knocked out her gyro compass. Another destroyed her after gun mounts. Johnston survived. Somehow, impossibly, she survived the initial hits and kept fighting. But Hardin saw the smoke pouring from her. Black smoke. She was hurt bad. At 7:05 a.m., USS Hoel joined the attack. Commander Leon Kintberger, her captain, took Hoel straight at the Japanese cruiser line. Hoel was firing continuously, her 5-inch guns hammering away at cruisers 7 miles distant. At 7:10 a.m., Hoel launched torpedoes at cruiser Haguro. Then she turned to run. She didn't make it. At 7:14 a.m., a salvo from Yamato straddled Hoel. One shell hit amidships, detonating in the forward engine room. Engineering Officer Lieutenant Junior Grade Robert L. Morris, 26 years old, from Portland, Oregon, was killed instantly along with his entire engine room crew, 19 men. Hoel lost power, dead in the water. The Japanese kept firing. At 7:16 a.m., another shell hit Hoel's bridge, killing the captain and everyone in the pilot house. The ship was now commanded from the stern by the executive officer, who had no communications with the rest of the ship. At 7:18 a.m., a third hit destroyed Hoel's remaining gun mounts. Mount 52's crew, Gun Captain Chief Gunner's Mate Warren J. Herring, 33, from Omaha, Nebraska, and 4 other men, were killed when the gun shield was blown backward by the explosion. Hoel was done. Sinking. Dead in the water and defenseless, but she'd bought the carriers 8 minutes. USS Heermann made a torpedo run at 7:20 a.m. She got closer than any ship should have, inside 5,000 yards, and fired at battleship Haruna. Her torpedoes missed, but she placed herself between the carriers and the Japanese battleships, weaving through shell splashes, firing continuously, drawing fire away from the carriers. The 3 destroyers had charged, 2 were crippled or sinking. 1 was running on luck and courage. And the Japanese were still coming. At 7:25 a.m., a 14-inch shell hit escort carrier Gambier Bay amidships. The explosion killed 8 men instantly and started fires throughout the ship. Gambier Bay began falling behind the other carriers, slowing, burning. The Japanese were winning. In 40 minutes they'd crippled 3 ships. Gambier Bay would sink within the hour. The other carriers were taking hits. Nothing was stopping them from reaching Leyte Gulf. That's when Commander Copeland made his decision. At 7:26 a.m., the radio in Mount 51 crackled. Admiral Sprague's voice. "Small boys attack. Conduct torpedo attack. Small boys attack." Small boys meant the destroyer escorts. The 4 DEs, Samuel B. Roberts, Dennis, John C. Butler, and Raymond. Hardin looked at McCaskill. McCaskill's face was gray. They both knew what the order meant. The destroyers had attacked, and 2 were dying. Now it was the destroyer escort's turn. Smaller ships, thinner armor, shorter-ranged torpedoes. Commander Copeland came on the ship's loudspeaker. His voice was calm, almost casual. "All hands, this is the captain. The Admiral has ordered us to make a torpedo attack. We're going in. I don't have to tell you what we're up against, but we're going to go in fighting. We're going to get close. We're going to fire our torpedoes. We're going to hurt them. Make every shot count." Then a pause. When Copeland spoke again, his voice was different, softer, personal. "The way I see it, this is what we were built for. Taffy 3 needs time. Those troops on the beaches need time. We're going to give them that time." Another pause. The ship was absolutely silent except for the sound of the engines and the distant rumble of gunfire. "All ahead flank," Copeland said. "Come left to course 270. We're taking her in." Course 270, due west, directly toward the Japanese. The Roberts shuddered as the engines accelerated to maximum power. 24 knots. The deck, plates vibrated. Black smoke poured from the stack as the boilers burned fuel oil at maximum rate. Through his gun sight, Hardin watched the Japanese ships grow larger, closer. He could see individual gun flashes now, see the shells arcing through the sky. The other 3 destroyer escorts fell in line behind Roberts. 4 ships, 1,350 tons each, against 200,000 tons of Japanese battleships and cruisers. Inside Mount 51, the crew prepared. Loading drill became automatic. Hardin adjusted his sights, checked the training gear, tested the elevation mechanism. McCaskill spoke quietly. "We're going to get close. When I give the word, rapid fire. Don't stop for anything, so just keep loading and firing." The loader, Seaman First Class Thomas J. Stevenson, 19, from Brooklyn, asked, "What are we shooting at, Chief?" "Everything," McCaskill said. "Anything. Whatever we can hit." The Roberts raced toward the Japanese at 24 knots. Behind her, Dennis, John C. Butler, and Raymond followed, each making maximum speed, all heading west. At 7:30 a.m., the Japanese spotted them. 4 small ships charging from the smoke. Easy targets. Battleship Congo shifted fire. Her 14-inch guns trained right, turrets elevated. At 7:32 a.m., she fired a full salvo at the Roberts. Hardin heard them coming, a freight train roar that built to a shriek. 4 shells, each weighing 1,500 pounds, traveling at 2,500 feet per second. They hit the water 50 yards short. The shell splashes towered over the ship. Seawater crashed across the deck. The concussion was like being punched in the chest. "She's got our range," McCaskill said quietly. Copeland ordered smoke. The Roberts generators began pouring out white phosphorus smoke. Within seconds, the ship disappeared into a thick white cloud. On radar, she was still visible, but optical rangefinders couldn't see her. The Roberts charged through her own smoke. Blind. No visibility, just radar and speed and hope. At 7:35 a.m. they burst out of the smoke, 2 miles from the Japanese cruiser line. Close enough to see men on deck, close enough to see their flags. "Commence firing," Copeland ordered. Mount 51 fired. The 5-inch gun slammed. Back in recoil. The breech opened automatically, ejecting the empty casing. Stevenson rammed home another round. The breech closed. Hardin laid the sight on a heavy cruiser. Fired, geared. The gun crew fell into rhythm. Load, aim, fire. Load, aim, fire. Every 6 seconds another shell. The gun barrel grew hot, burning hot. The paint blistered off. Mount 52, the aft gun, was firing too. Both guns hammering away. The deck shook with each shot. Spent casings piled up, rolling across the deck. At 7:38 a.m., the Roberts reached torpedo range. Less than 2 miles. Lieutenant William F. Moylan, the torpedo officer, 25 years old, from San Diego, fired a spread of 3 torpedoes at cruiser Chokai. Then the Roberts turned. Hard right rudder. The ship heeled over, her turn so tight that the deck tilted 30 degrees. Men grabbed for handholds. They headed back toward the smoke. Maximum speed. Guns still firing behind them. That's when Yamato's secondary battery found them. At 7:40 a.m., the Roberts was racing back toward the smoke screen when the first shell hit. It was a 6-inch round from Yamato's secondary battery. It hit amidships, port side, at the waterline. The explosion punched through the thin hull and detonated inside the forward engine room. The blast wave killed 3 men instantly. Machinist's mate, First Class Herbert S. Helseth, 22, from Minnesota. Fireman First Class Norbert J. Brady, 20, from Illinois. And Fireman Second Class George S. Carbon, 19, from Ohio. They were standing near the hit when the shell came through. Their deaths were immediate. The engine room began flooding. Water poured through the hole, 3 feet wide, jagged. The hull peeled back like torn paper. Damage control teams responded within seconds, but the water was coming in too fast. Lieutenant Lloyd Garnett, the engineering officer, was in the engine room when it hit. He stayed. He and his team worked to shore up the hole, pump out water, keep the engines running. The Roberts didn't slow down. Both engines still functioning, still making smoke, still charging toward safety. At 7:42 a.m. the second shell hit. This one was from cruiser Chokai, an 8-inch round that hit the superstructure just below the bridge. It passed completely through the pilot house level without exploding, exited the starboard side, and detonated in the air 20 feet from the ship. The shrapnel killed signalman Third Class Robert D. Leclerc, 21, from Michigan, who was on the bridge wing. It wounded 4 others, including the navigator. But the bridge crew stayed at their stations. Copeland was still commanding, radar still tracking, helm still responsive. Mount 51 kept firing. Hardin couldn't see where his shells were landing, too much smoke, but he kept shooting. The gun captain called out targets from radar bearings. Hardin adjusted aim, fired, adjusted, fired. Stevenson was loading like a machine. Grab shell from the ready rack, ram it home. Breech closes, fire, eject, load, 6 seconds per round. His hands were blistered from the hot casings. He didn't stop. At 7:44 a.m., Mount 52 scored a hit. A 5-inch shell struck cruiser Chokai's torpedo mount. The explosion detonated Chokai's torpedoes. A massive fireball erupted from the cruiser's midships. She veered out of line, burning, slowing. "We got one!" someone shouted over the radio. The Roberts crew felt a surge of pride. Their pop-gun 5-inch rounds couldn't sink a cruiser, but they'd hurt her, made her back off. They were still fighting. At 7:47 a.m., one of the Roberts torpedoes hit. Lieutenant Moylan's spread, 3 torpedoes fired at 7:38 a.m., had been running true. The torpedoes were Mark 15 models carrying 600 pounds of TNT. traveling at 45 knots. The second torpedo in the spread hit cruiser Chokai on the port side, amidships, right in the forward engine room. The explosion was enormous. A column of water and smoke rose 300 feet into the air. Chokai lurched sideways from the impact. Her speed dropped immediately. Black smoke poured from her stack. She began listing to port. Chokai fell out of formation, dead in the water within 3 minutes. Her crew fought to save her, but the flooding was catastrophic. By 8 a.m. she was listing 20 degrees and sinking by the bow. The Japanese formation broke around her. Ships turned to avoid the crippled cruiser. For 5 crucial minutes, their advance toward the carriers slowed. The Roberts had bought more time, but the cost was coming. At 7:51 a.m., battleship Congo fired at the Roberts from 8 miles away. A full salvo from her forward turrets. 4 14-inch shells, each weighing 1,185 pounds. One shell hit Mount 52. The shell struck the gun shield directly, penetrated the thin armor, and detonated inside the mount. The explosion was catastrophic. The entire gun mount was destroyed, blown apart, the barrel bent, the shield shredded. Everyone inside died instantly. Gun, Captain Gunner's Mate, First Class, Paul Henry Carr, 24, from Oklahoma. Pointer Gunner's Mate, Third Class, Jack T. Usen, 21, from Pennsylvania. Trainer Seaman First Class Courtney B. Vance, 19, from Georgia. Loader Seaman First Class Stephen W. C. Flack, 19, from West Virginia. And Powderman. Seaman Second Class Charles A. Natter, 18, from New York. 5 men, all killed in the same instant, but Mount 52 had fired 324 rounds before being destroyed. 324 shells in 13 minutes. The crew had fired until they couldn't fire anymore. Damage control teams rushed aft. What they found was horrifying. The mount was gone, just twisted wreckage and bodies, fires burning, ammunition cooking off in the heat. In the wreckage, they found Paul Carr, still alive, barely. He had been blown backward by the explosion but was somehow conscious. Both his legs were shattered. His abdomen was torn open. He was holding a 5-inch shell, trying to load it into the destroyed gun. Lieutenant William S. Burton, the damage control officer, tried to take the shell. Carr wouldn't let go. "Help me load," he said. "We have to keep firing." "Paul, the gun is gone," Burton said. Carr looked at him, looked at the shell in his hands. Then he collapsed. He died 2 minutes later, still holding the shell. At 7:55 a.m., the Roberts emerged from the smoke screen on the east side, near the carriers. She was hurt. Engine room flooding. Mount 52 destroyed. Fires amidships. Dead in the water and list in scene. G 5 degrees. But she was still afloat, still fighting. Mount 51 was still operational. Copeland ordered the crew to get the engines restarted. Engineering teams worked frantically in the flooded compartments. They sealed bulkheads, pumped water, rerouted steam lines. At 8:02 a.m., the engines came back online. The Roberts began moving again, slowly, making 12 knots instead of 24. But moving. Mount 51 was still firing. Hardin had lost count of the rounds. They'd fired more than 300 already. The barrel was glowing red-hot. The recoil mechanism was smoking. But the gun still worked. McCaskill called out targets. A Japanese destroyer had gotten too close, trying to finish off Johnston, which was crippled nearby. Hardin laid the gun on the destroyer, fired, adjusted, fired again. At 8:05 a.m., Hardin saw something impossible. The Japanese ships were turning away, not just one ship, all of them. The battleships, the cruisers, the destroyers. The entire center force was turning north, away from the carriers. At first, nobody believed it. It had to be a tactical maneuver. They were repositioning for another attack, but they kept turning, and then they kept going north. They were retreating. Admiral Kurita had ordered withdrawal. His force had been damaged. Last, Chokai sinking, Kumano crippled, several other cruisers hit. His ships were scattered, trying to avoid torpedoes and dodge attacks. Radio intercepts indicated massive American airstrikes incoming. Kurita didn't know those airstrikes were from baby flat-tops launching everything they had, even anti-submarine planes loaded with depth charges. He thought they were fleet carriers. He thought he was facing a much larger force than Taffy 3. The destroyer and destroyer escort attacks had convinced him he was facing American heavy ships. No destroyer escort would charge battleships unless covering for something bigger. No sane commander would order such an attack unless he had backup. Kurita thought he was being led into a trap. At 8:20 a.m., the last Japanese ship disappeared over the northern horizon. The battle was over. The carriers were safe. The landing force at Leyte Gulf, safe. Taffy 3 had won. But the cost was horrific. The Samuel B. Roberts wasn't the only destroyer escort to charge. All 4 DEs, Roberts, Dennis, John C. Butler, and Raymond, had gone in together. USS Dennis, under Lieutenant Commander Samuel Hansen, made her torpedo run at 7:35 a.m. She launched 3 torpedoes at cruiser Noshiro from 5,000 yards. All 3 missed. But Dennis stayed in the fight, firing her 5-inch guns continuously, placing herself between carriers and cruisers. At 7:48 a.m., Dennis took a hit from Yamato's 6-inch secondary battery. The shell hit the bridge, killing the helmsman and wounding 3 officers. Dennis kept fighting. Lieutenant Richard L. Rogers, the engineering officer, took command and continued the attack. USS John C. Butler, under Lieutenant Commander John E. Pace, launched torpedoes at 7:40 a.m. Her spread targeted heavy cruiser Tone. 1 torpedo possibly hit. Tone was seen to shudder and slow, but the damage wasn't confirmed. Butler then turned and ran through her own smoke, taking 12 near misses but no direct hits. USS Raymond, under Lieutenant Commander Aaron F. Beyer, fired her torpedoes at 7:43 a.m., targeting cruiser Haguro. Raymond was the luckiest of the 4 DEs. She took no hits at all despite firing over 400 5-inch rounds and staying in range for 40 minutes, but the destroyers took the worst casualties. USS Johnston, the first ship to charge, had been hit at least 40 times. Commander Ernest Evans was wounded early in the battle but refused to leave the bridge. At 8:10 a.m., with his ship dead in the water, fires out of control, and Japanese destroyers closing in, Evans gave the order to abandon ship. Johnston sank at 8:50 a.m. Evans went down with his ship. He was last seen on the bridge, standing at attention as the water rose. Of Johnston's 327 crew, 186 died. Evans was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. USS Howell sank at 8:55 a.m. after taking more than 40 hits from battleship and cruiser fire. Her crew fought until the end, manually loading and firing guns even after power failed. Commander Leon Kintberger survived. Dyushchani rescued after 4 hours in the water. Of Howell's 330 crew, 253 died. USS Herman survived. She'd taken only 6 hits, miraculous considering she'd been inside 4,000 yards of Japanese battleships. Commander Amos Hathaway had handled his ship brilliantly, weaving through salvos, turning at exactly the right moments. Herman limped back to base with 7 killed and 12 wounded. Escort carrier Gambier Bay sank at 9:07 a.m. after taking multiple 14-inch and 8-inch hits. She was the only American aircraft carrier sunk by naval gunfire in World War II. Of her 860 crew, 147 died. The 4 destroyer escorts all survived. Damaged, some badly, but afloat. Of the 4 DEs, Samuel B. Roberts took the worst damage and the most casualties. Aboard the Yamato, Admiral Kurita was confused. His force should have destroyed Taffy 3. His ships had overwhelming firepower. The math was impossible to argue, yet the American ships kept fighting. The first destroyer, Johnston, had charged straight at him. Alone, firing continuously, suicidal. Yet Johnston had survived the initial hits and launched torpedoes that forced Yamato to turn away, breaking the battleship's attack run. Then more destroyers attacked. Then the destroyer escorts, tiny ships with pop-gun armament, charged directly at his cruisers, fired torpedoes, hit Chokai hard enough to cripple her. Kurita's formation was scattered. His ships were dodging torpedoes. His cruisers were damaged. And American planes were everywhere. TBM Avengers dropping depth charges on battleships. FM-2 Wildcats making strafing runs with 50 caliber machine guns. Even SNJ trainer aircraft dropping anti-submarine bombs. Radio intercepts indicated American carriers nearby. Fleet carriers. His intelligence officer reported that the planes attacking were too numerous to come from just escort carriers. Had to be Essex-class fleet carriers. Had to be a trap. At 7:55 a.m., Kurita made his decision. He ordered his force to reform and withdraw north. They'd circle around, reorganize, then approach Leyte Gulf from a different angle. But as his ships withdrew, more reports came in. American submarines in the area. More air.